On his way to the job interview of his dreams, a young black man witnesses an elderly woman collapse on a crowded bus. When the driver heartlessly forces her off at a deserted stop, he can't just sit there. He jumps out, helps her to the hospital, knowing it will cost him the chance of a lifetime. But just when despair sets in, an unexpected email arrives. The woman's son, the very man he had been meant to meet, has found him with an offer beyond anything he'd ever dared to dream. Before we dive deeper into this story, tell us where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more heartwarming stories every day. The alarm clock's shrill cry pierced through the pre-dawn darkness at 5:47 a.m. Malik Johnson's hand shot out from under the thin comforter, silencing it before the second ring could wake his little sister in the next room. He lay still for a moment, staring at the water stain on the ceiling, a brown constellation that had grown larger after last week's storm. The landlord still hadn't returned his calls. The studio apartment was cold. Chicago's early spring mornings had a way of seeping through the cracked window frame, no matter how much weather stripping he stuffed into the gaps. Malik exhaled, watching his breath form a small cloud in the dim light filtering through the threadbare curtains. He swung his legs out of bed, his feet finding the worn carpet, and shuffled to the kitchenette. The coffee maker, a $20 model from a thrift store, gurgled and hissed as he filled it with water. While it brewed, he quietly pushed open the door to the bedroom where 8-year-old Ariana slept, her small form barely making a dent in the twin mattress. She clutched a stuffed bear with one missing eye, a hand-me-down from a church donation drive 3 Christmases ago. Malik's chest tightened. She deserved so much more than this. Back in the kitchen, he poured himself a cup of coffee, weak and bitter, stretched to last the week, and pulled out his laptop. The screen flickered to life, displaying the email he'd read at least a dozen times since it arrived 2 days ago. Subject: Interview Invitation, Junior Data Analyst Position. Dear Mr. Johnson, thank you for your application to Brighton Technologies. We are impressed with your credentials and would like to invite you for an in-person interview on Friday, March 22nd at 9 a.m. Brighton Technologies. One of Chicago's fastest-growing tech firms, the kind of place that could change everything. The salary alone, $52,000 a year to start, would mean a real apartment. A bedroom for Ariana with an actual door, maybe even saving for her college fund. Malik closed his eyes and the memory crashed over him like it always did in quiet moments. His father, Marcus Johnson, collapsing in the parking lot of the warehouse where he'd worked double shifts for 15 years. The heart attack came 3 weeks after he'd been passed over for promotion again. The doctor said it was stress. Malik knew it was more than that. It was the weight of being invisible. The exhaustion of working twice as hard for half the recognition. Black men have to be twice as good to get half as far, his father had told him once, his voice heavy with a lifetime of proof. Don't you ever forget that, son. Malik hadn't forgotten. He carried those words like a stone in his chest. He glanced at the stack of bills on the counter: electric, internet, rent. The electric bill had a red final notice stamp across the top. He had 3 days to pay it, or they'd cut the power. The money from his part-time gig at the warehouse wasn't enough. It was never enough. But today could change that. Malik carefully placed his one good suit, a navy blue ensemble his father had worn to his own job interviews, on a hanger. He'd pressed it last night, working out every wrinkle until it looked almost new. His resume was printed on cream-colored paper, tucked into a folder that he'd bought specifically for this occasion. He checked his phone. The bus left at 7:45. The interview was downtown, a 40-minute ride if traffic cooperated. He'd be there by 8:30, plenty of time to compose himself, maybe grab a cheap breakfast, and walk in with confidence. Everything was planned. Everything was ready. Ariana stirred in the bedroom. Malik walked over and gently brushed a strand of hair from her face. She blinked awake, her brown eyes focusing on him. "Morning, baby girl," he whispered. "Is today the big day?" She mumbled, still half asleep. "Yeah, today's the day." She smiled, wrapping her arms around his neck. "You're gonna do great, Malik. You're the smartest person I know." He held her close, breathing in the scent of the discount shampoo they shared. "I'm gonna make it better for us, I promise. I know you will." He kissed her forehead and stood, his resolve hardening into steel. Today was the day. No matter what it took. "Today's the day, baby girl," he whispered again, more to himself than to her. The number 56 bus was already crowded when Malik boarded at 7:47 a.m. He squeezed through the narrow aisle, his folder pressed against his chest to protect it from the crush of bodies. The air inside was thick, a mixture of sweat, cheap cologne and the lingering smell of someone's fast food breakfast. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting everything in a sickly yellow glow. He found a spot near the back, standing with one hand gripping the overhead rail. Around him Chicago's working class pressed together in uncomfortable proximity, a woman in hospital scrub scrolling through her phone, a construction worker with paint-splattered jeans staring out the window, a teenager with headphones bobbing his head to music only he could hear. Malik pulled out his phone and opened his notes app, reviewing the answers he'd prepared for common interview questions. Tell me about yourself. Why do you want to work at Brighton Technologies? What's your greatest weakness? He'd rehearsed each response until they felt natural, not memorized. The bus lurched forward, stopping and starting in the morning traffic. Malik glanced at his watch, 8:03, still good, still on time. Near the front of the bus, in one of the priority seats, sat an elderly white woman. She looked to be in her late 70s, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and a wool coat that had seen better days. Her face was etched with deep lines, and she held a worn leather purse in her lap with both hands. There was something dignified about her posture, despite the obvious pain she was trying to hide, the way she shifted her weight, the slight grimace when the bus hit a pothole. Eleanor Brooks had been a teacher for 42 years. Malik didn't know this yet, but he would soon. What he did know, in that moment, was that she looked tired, bone-deep tired. The bus driver, a heavy-set man with a perpetual scowl, barked into his radio about being behind schedule. The passengers swayed with each jerky movement, a collective choreography of public transit. At 8:17, as the bus approached a major intersection downtown, a car cut sharply into the lane. The driver slammed on the brakes. Everything happened in slow motion, and all at once. Eleanor, who had been shifting in her seat to ease the pain in her lower back, wasn't prepared. The sudden stop threw her forward. Her hands lost their grip on the purse. She tumbled from the seat onto the hard rubber floor with a sickening thud, her hip taking the full impact. Her cry of pain was sharp and unmistakable, a sound that cut through the ambient noise of the bus like a knife. For a moment, everything froze, then came the shuffle of uncomfortable movement, the collective turning away. The woman in scrubs grimaced but stayed put. The construction worker glanced over, then back to his window. The teenager didn't even remove his headphones. The bus driver didn't get up. He looked in his rearview mirror, his expression hardening. "Ma'am, I can't have you falling on my bus. You all right?" Eleanor tried to push herself up, but her face contorted in agony. "I think I hurt my hip. Please, I just need—" "I'm not getting sued, lady." The driver's voice was flat, devoid of compassion. "Company policy. If you're injured, you gotta get off at the next stop." "But I'm nowhere near." "Next stop, final, absolute." The bus pulled forward again, and Eleanor bit back a sob. She managed to pull herself onto her hands and knees, trembling with the effort. 2 more blocks, and the bus stopped at a corner, not a main stop, just a place where the driver decided to open the doors. "This is you," he announced. No one helped her stand. No one offered a hand. Malik watched from the back, his jaw clenched. He looked at his watch, 8:21. The bus would reach his stop in 12 minutes. From there it was a 5-minute walk to Brighton Technologies. He'd still have time to grab that coffee, collect himself, and walk in ready to impress. Eleanor limped toward the door, using the seats for support. Each step seemed to cost her everything. She made it to the top of the steps, looked down at the gap between the bus and the curb, an impossible distance given her pain, and hesitated. The driver sighed loudly. "Come on, lady, I got a schedule." She descended slowly, her breathing ragged. As her foot touched the pavement, she stumbled, barely catching herself on a nearby pole. The doors hissed shut. The bus started to move, and Malik stood there, frozen, staring out the window at the elderly woman now standing alone on a desolate stretch of road. The buildings here were mostly warehouses and closed storefronts. No coffee shops, no pedestrians, just empty sidewalks and the distant rumble of traffic. His hand tightened around his folder. His eyes moved to his watch, 8:22, then back to Eleanor, who was now lowering herself onto the curb, her face buried in her hands. The bus picked up speed. Malik's heart pounded. His mind raced through the calculations. Every minute that passed, every block the bus traveled, was a minute closer to his future. That interview was his shot. Maybe his only shot. But the image of Eleanor, alone and in pain, seared itself into his consciousness. He thought of his father, collapsing in that parking lot. He thought of Ariana, trusting him to make things better. He thought of what kind of man he wanted to be. "Stop," Malik shouted, pushing his way toward the front. "Stop the bus." The driver glanced in the mirror. "What? I need to get off. Now, we're between stops," I said now. Something in Malik's voice must have registered because the driver, grumbling, pulled to the side and opened the doors. Malik didn't wait. He jumped down to the pavement and started running back the way they'd come. Behind him, the bus pulled away, carrying his carefully laid plans with it. By the time Malik reached Eleanor, she had managed to sit on the curb, her back against a graffitied wall. Her face was pale, and she was taking slow, measured breaths, trying to manage the pain. "Ma'am?" Malik called out, slowing as he approached. "Are you okay?" She looked up, startled, her eyes, watery and blue, widened slightly at the sight of a young black man in a suit running toward her. For a split second, Malik saw the flicker of fear, the reflexive tension. He'd seen it before, countless times. It didn't surprise him anymore. It just hurt in a quiet, constant way. He stopped a respectful distance away, and raised his hand slightly, his folder still clutched in one. "I was on the bus, I saw what happened. I just want to help, if I can." Eleanor's expression softened. Shame replaced the fear, shame that she'd felt it in the first place. "I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to." "It's okay," Malik said gently. "Are you hurt?" "My hip." She touched her side tenderly. "I think I might have really done something to it this time. It's been bad for a while, but this," she trailed off, pain tightening her features. Malik knelt down, keeping a respectful distance. "We need to get you some help. Do you have anyone I can call?" "My son, but he's in a meeting." "He's always in meetings." She laughed, but it came out as more of a sob. "I was just trying to get to Northside. I volunteer at a children's home there on Fridays. They're expecting me." Malik glanced around. The street was nearly deserted. A few cars passed, but no one slowed. He pulled out his phone and opened a ride-sharing app. The estimated wait time was 38 minutes. He tried a different app. 45 minutes. "Come on," he muttered under his breath. He checked his watch. 8:33. The interview was in 27 minutes. He called the first taxi company in his contacts. The dispatcher sounded bored. "We can get someone to you in about an hour." "An hour? This is an emergency." "Sorry, buddy. Friday morning rush. That's the best I can do." Malik ended the call, frustration building in his chest. He looked at Eleanor, who was now shivering despite her coat. The wind had picked up, carrying the promise of rain. "Okay," he said, making a decision. "We're going to get you to a hospital." "But how?" "I'll figure it out." "Can you stand if I help you?" With considerable effort, and not a little pain, Eleanor managed to get to her feet with Malik's support. He was careful, mindful of her injury, and when she was upright, she swayed slightly. He steadied her. "There's a bus bench about a block that way," Malik said, nodding down the street. "Let's get you somewhere to sit, while I call an ambulance." "An ambulance? No, that's too expensive. Ma'am, with all respect, I don't think you have much choice." They moved slowly, Malik practically carrying her weight. Each step seemed to take forever. Halfway there, the sky opened up, releasing a cold drizzle that quickly soaked through their clothes. Malik shrugged off his jacket, his father's jacket, and draped it over Eleanor's shoulders. "You don't have to, it's okay. I've got it." By the time they reached the bench, they were both drenched. Malik dialed 911, giving the dispatcher their location. "How long?" he asked. "Paramedics are en route. Approximately 15 minutes. "Thank you." He ended the call, and sat down next to Eleanor, his suit pants soaking through from the wet bench. He looked at his watch. 8:48. The interview had started 3 minutes ago. He pulled out his phone, and opened his email, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. What could he even say? "Sorry, I stopped to help someone, and lost track of time." They'd never believe it. And even if they did, it wouldn't matter. Opportunity didn't wait for explanations. Eleanor reached over, and placed her wrinkled hand on his. "You were going somewhere important, weren't you?" Malik didn't answer right away. He just stared at the water pooling on the pavement, reflecting the gray sky above. Finally, he nodded. Yeah, I had a job interview, could have changed everything for my family.
Oh no.
Her face crumpled. I'm so sorry, don't be. He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw his own grandmother, long past, staring back. It's not your fault, it's not anyone's fault. Sometimes things just happen. But your interview is over, Malik said quietly. The words tasted like ash. But you're going to be okay, that's what matters. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. Why did you stop for me? The question hung in the air, heavier than the rain. Malik thought about his father, he thought about Ariana, he thought about the man he saw in the mirror every morning, and the man he wanted to be, because no one else did, he said simply. The ambulance arrived 12 minutes later. The paramedics, efficient and professional, quickly assessed Eleanor's condition and loaded her onto a stretcher. One of them, a young woman with kind eyes, looked at Malik. You coming with her? He hesitated. He could leave now, go home, change, try to salvage something from the wreckage of his morning. But Eleanor was looking at him with such vulnerability, such trust, that he couldn't bring himself to walk away. Yeah, he said, I'm coming. St. Joseph's Medical Center smelled like antiseptic and defeat. Malik sat in the emergency waiting room, his damp clothes gradually drying into uncomfortable stiffness. The fluorescent lights were too bright, the plastic chairs too hard, and the TV mounted in the corner was showing a morning talk show with the volume too low to hear properly, but too high to ignore. Eleanor had been taken for X-rays immediately upon arrival. Malik had waited, checking his phone every few minutes out of habit, though he didn't know what he was hoping to see. No messages, no missed calls, the world had kept spinning without him. Around him the ER waiting room told 100 stories of morning gone wrong, a construction worker holding a bloody towel to his hand, a mother with a feverish toddler, an elderly man coughing into a handkerchief. Everyone looked tired, everyone looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. Malik had answered questions from 2 different hospital staff members, both of whom had eyed him with barely concealed suspicion. One, a heavy-set security guard, had been particularly thorough. So you're saying you just helped her, you don't know her, what were you doing in that neighborhood? I was on the bus with her, I saw her fall, I helped, that's it. The guard had written everything down, his pen pressing hard enough to indent the paper beneath. Malik knew what he was thinking, he dealt with it his whole life. The automatic assumption that a young black man must be up to something. The weight of proving innocence before being proven guilty. An hour passed, then another. Malik had long since given up on the interview. He'd sent a brief email apologizing for missing it, citing a family emergency. It felt hollow, like a lie even though it wasn't. He didn't expect a response. Around 11:30 a.m., a nurse approached him. Mr. Johnson, he stood quickly. Yes. Is she okay? Mrs. Brooks is stable. She's got a fractured hip, not a complete break, but enough that she'll need some time to heal. We're keeping her for observation, possibly surgery in the next few days. She's asking for you. Malik followed the nurse through the maze of hospital corridors, to a room in the observation ward. Eleanor was propped up in bed, looking small and fragile against the white sheets. An IV was taped to her arm, and monitors beeped steadily beside her, but her eyes brightened when she saw him. You stayed, she said, her voice hoarse. Couldn't just leave you here alone. He pulled up a chair beside the bed, settling into it with a sigh. You've done more than enough already, more than anyone had a right to expect. Malik shrugged. How are you feeling? Like I got hit by a bus, which is ironic. She managed a weak smile. The doctor says I'll need surgery, a few months of physical therapy. At my age well, it's not ideal, but I've survived worse. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Outside the window, the rain had stopped, and weak sunlight was trying to break through the clouds. I used to be a teacher, Eleanor said suddenly. 5th grade, mostly, taught for 42 years at Lincoln Elementary on the South Side. 42 years, that's incredible. It was my life. My late husband George used to joke that I loved those kids more than I loved him. She smiled at the memory. Maybe I did in a way. You know how it is when you see a child struggling, and you find that one key that unlocks their potential. That moment when they finally understand something they've been wrestling with. Nothing in the world quite like it. Sounds like you were good at it. I tried to be. I saw so many kids come through my classroom, kids from every background you can imagine, some with everything handed to them, some with nothing but the clothes on their backs. But the thing I learned, after all those years, is that kindness doesn't have a demographic. Good people come from everywhere, and they look like everyone. Malik nodded slowly. Not everyone believes that. No, Eleanor agreed quietly. They don't, and that's one of the great failures of our society. This idea that we can judge someone's worth by the color of their skin, or the size of their bank account. She looked at him directly. You gave up something important today to help me, didn't you? It doesn't matter. It does matter. It matters because you did it anyway. Because when everyone else looked away, you didn't. Her voice cracked slightly. Why did you stop for me? This was the second time she'd asked. Malik leaned back in his chair, trying to find words for something that felt too big for language. My dad, he began slowly, worked himself to death trying to prove he belonged, trying to earn respect that should have been freely given. He never got it, and when he died, nobody at that warehouse even came to the funeral. Not one person. Eleanor's hand found his across the bedrail. I promised myself I wouldn't be like that. I wouldn't let the world make me cold, and when I saw you on that curb, alone and hurting, I couldn't just leave, because if I did, I'd be no different than everyone else who turned away from my father when he needed help. I'm sorry about your father, me too. Before either could say more, the door opened. A tall man in an expensive suit entered, his phone pressed to his ear. I understand that, Margaret, but tell them we're not moving on the contract until we have confirmation from legal. I don't care if. He stopped mid-sentence when he saw Eleanor. Mom, Richard. Eleanor's face lit up. I'm okay, honey, I'm okay. Richard Brooks, CEO of Brighton Technologies, though Malik didn't know that yet, ended his call and rushed to his mother's side. He was in his early 50s, with silver at his temples and the kind of confident bearing that came from years of making decisions that affected hundreds of lives. The hospital called me, Richard said, his voice tight with worry. They said you fell, that you're going to need surgery. It's not as bad as it sounds, not as bad. Mom, you have a fractured hip. I'll heal. I've got good doctors. Richard's eyes finally landed on Malik, who had stood when he entered, instinctively making himself smaller in the presence of obvious wealth and power. And who's this? Before Malik could introduce himself, Eleanor jumped in. This is Malik Johnson. He saved me, Richard. I fell on the bus, and the driver left me on the side of the road. Malik got off the bus and stayed with me, called the ambulance, rode with me here. He's been here all morning making sure I was okay. Richard's expression shifted, moving through several emotions Malik had learned to recognize over the years: surprise, suspicion, and finally something that might have been grudging respect. He extended his hand. Thank you. I thank you. Malik shook it. Just did what anyone should have done, but most wouldn't have. Richard pulled out his wallet, flipping through the bills. Please let me give you something for your trouble. For the time you've lost. No. The word came out sharper than Malik intended. He softened his voice. No thank you. I don't want money. I just wanted to make sure your mother was safe. Richard stared at him for a long moment, his hand still holding the open wallet. Then he slowly closed it and put it away. All right, but if there's anything I can do, there isn't. Malik glanced at his watch. 12:17. I should actually get going. Let you two have some time together. Wait. Eleanor reached for him. At least let me get your contact information. I'd like to stay in touch, if that's all right with you. Malik hesitated, then nodded. He wrote his number on a notepad by the bed. Take care of yourself, Mrs. Brooks. You too, Malik. And thank you for seeing me, for stopping. He nodded once more, unable to trust his voice, and headed for the door. His folder, his beautiful carefully prepared folder, sat on the chair where he'd left it. He grabbed it, the damp edges now curled and useless. As he walked down the hospital corridor toward the elevators, he heard Richard's voice behind him. Wait. Malik turned. Richard was standing in the hallway, looking uncertain for perhaps the first time since he'd entered. I didn't get your last name. Johnson. Malik Johnson. Well, Mr. Johnson, I mean what I said. If there's ever anything I can do. There isn't. Malik repeated, but more gently this time. Just take care of your mom. She's a good person. The elevator doors opened, Malik stepped inside, and the last thing he saw before they closed was Richard Brooks standing there, watching him with an expression that was impossible to read. The folder in Malik's hands was ruined. His suit was rumpled and dried in weird patches. His phone showed 3 missed calls from the temp agency about shifts he could pick up, minimum wage work that would barely cover the electric bill. But as he rode the elevator down, he felt something he hadn't expected: peace. Whatever happened next, he'd made a choice he could live with. In a world that often felt designed to erode dignity and kindness, he'd held on to both. For now that would have to be enough. Richard Brooks stood in the hospital hallway, long after the elevator doors closed, his mother's words echoing in his mind. "He saved me." Such simple words, but they carried weight he was still trying to process. He returned to Eleanor's room, where she was resting with her eyes closed. When he sat down, she opened them and smiled. "He's special, that young man. You just met him." "I know people, Richard. 42 years of teaching will do that, and I'm telling you, Malik Johnson is someone special." Richard pulled out his phone, intending to return to the dozens of emails demanding his attention, but found himself staring at the blank screen instead. His mother's accident had shaken him more than he cared to admit. Eleanor Brooks was the most independent person he knew, a widow of 15 years who still volunteered, still drove, still lived alone despite his repeated offers to hire help. The idea of her alone and in pain on some deserted street corner, abandoned by a bus driver and ignored by strangers, made his blood boil. And yet one person had stopped. A young man who, by the looks of his worn suit and the careful way he'd handled that water-damaged folder, clearly couldn't afford to miss whatever appointment he'd been heading to. Richard stood and walked to where Malik had been sitting. The chair was still slightly damp. On the floor beside it, half tucked under the chair leg, was a sheet of paper. He bent down and picked it up. It was a resume printed on what had once been nice paper but was now crinkled and water-stained. At the top, in bold letters, Malik Johnson. Richard scanned the page. Bachelor's degree in computer science from Illinois State University, graduated with honors. A string of part-time jobs and freelance work, nothing permanent, nothing befitting his qualifications. References from professors who called him exceptional and one of the brightest students I've had the privilege to teach. At the bottom, carefully formatted in a professional font, objective, seeking full-time employment in data analysis where I can utilize my skills while building a stable future for my family. Family. The word stood out. Richard glanced at his mother, who was now dozing peacefully, and then back at the resume. He pulled out his phone and called his office. His assistant Margaret answered on the first ring. "Mr. Brooks, I have those contracts ready for you to review." "Margaret, I need you to do something for me. Pull up our interview schedule from this morning." "Of course, give me just a moment." The sound of typing. "We had 2 interviews today. One for the junior data analyst position at 9 a.m., one for a marketing coordinator at 11. The data analyst, did the candidate show?" "No, actually. He emailed this morning, saying he had a family emergency." HR marked it as a no-show and moved on to the second-choice candidate, who, what was the candidate's name? More typing. "Johnson. Malik Johnson." Richard looked down at the resume in his hand, then at his mother's sleeping form. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of humor. "Margaret, I want you to contact Mr. Johnson. Tell him we'd like to reschedule his interview for Monday morning. Sir, with all respect, he already missed his appointment. We have protocols. I'm aware of our protocols. I'm also the CEO, which means I get to override them when I see fit. This young man had a legitimate emergency. He was helping someone who'd been hurt. I want to give him another chance." "If you're sure." "I am. And Margaret, put it in my calendar. I want to be in the room for this one." "You want to sit in on a junior analyst interview?" "Yes." There was a pause, during which Richard could practically hear Margaret recalculating every assumption she'd made about this conversation. "Of course, Mr. Brooks, I'll reach out to Mr. Johnson right away." "Thank you." He ended the call and sat down again, this time in the chair Malik had occupied for hours. The resume lay in his lap, a piece of paper that represented countless hours of study, of hope, of someone trying to build something better from difficult circumstances. Richard Brooks had built an empire from nothing. He'd started Brighton Technologies in a garage 23 years ago with maxed-out credit cards and a dream that bordered on delusion. He knew what it meant to bet everything on a single opportunity. He knew how crushing it felt when that opportunity slipped away. But he also knew the value of second chances. His phone buzzed with a response from Margaret, contact made. Mr. Johnson accepted the Monday 9 a.m. slot. He sounded surprised but grateful. Richard smiled for the first time that day. That evening, Malik sat with Ariana at their small kitchen table, 2 bowls of ramen between them. The cheap stuff, 10 for $1 at the corner store. He'd added a fried egg to each bowl, their one indulgence. How was school? He asked, trying to sound upbeat despite the exhaustion settling into his bones. Good, we learned about fractions today. Mrs. Chen says I'm really good at math. That's my girl. Smart like your daddy. Ariana twirled noodles around her fork, then looked up at him with those knowing eyes that seemed too old for 8 years. Did you get the job? Malik hesitated. He'd been preparing this conversation all afternoon, trying to find a way to explain that wouldn't crush her hope. I didn't make it to the interview. Her face fell. Why not? Because I had to help someone. An old lady fell on the bus, and everyone else just walked away. I couldn't do that. So you helped her instead of going to your interview?
Yeah.
Ariana was quiet for a long moment, processing this. Then she reached across the table and took his hand. Daddy used to say that doing the right thing doesn't always feel good at first, but it always feels right eventually. Do you remember? Malik's throat tightened. I remember. Then you did the right thing. Even if it means we have to eat ramen for another month. She squeezed his hand.
Even then.
They finished their dinner in comfortable silence, and Malik was helping Ariana with her homework when his phone buzzed with an email notification. He almost ignored it, probably another rejection, another temp agency offering him night shifts unloading trucks, but something made him open it. Subject, rescheduled interview. Brighton Technologies, dear Mr. Johnson, we understand that you experienced a family emergency this morning that prevented you from attending your scheduled interview. We would like to offer you the opportunity to reschedule for Monday, March 25th at 9 a.m. Please confirm your availability at your earliest convenience. Best regards, Margaret Stevens, Executive Assistant, Brighton Technologies. Malik read it 3 times, certain he was misunderstanding. Companies didn't reschedule missed interviews. They had backup candidates, they moved on. That was the nature of the game. You got one shot, and if you missed it, tough luck. He looked at Ariana, who was watching him curiously. What is it? They're giving me another chance, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The interview, they want to reschedule. Ariana's face broke into a wide smile. See, Daddy was right. Good things come to people who do good things. Malik pulled his sister into a hug, his eyes stinging with tears he refused to let fall.
Yeah, baby girl.
Maybe they do. Later that night, after Ariana had gone to bed, Malik stood at the window of their apartment, looking out at the Chicago skyline. Somewhere out there, in one of those glass towers, was Brighton Technologies, and on Monday he'd get another shot at changing their lives. He didn't know why they'd given him a second chance. He didn't know that his lost resume had found its way into the hands of the CEO. He didn't know that Eleanor Brooks had spent her evening telling her son stories about a young man who'd sacrificed his own future to help a stranger. All he knew was that sometimes, maybe, the universe paid attention to the small acts of kindness that no one else seemed to notice. Sometimes, he whispered to himself, echoing his sister's wisdom, miracles are just consequences of kindness. And for the first time in a long time, Malik Johnson allowed himself to hope. Monday morning arrived with surprising warmth. Spring was finally asserting itself over Chicago's stubborn winter, and as Malik rode the bus downtown, a different route, a different bus, a different driver, he watched the city wake up around him. Joggers on the lakefront path. Coffee shops opening their doors. The ordinary magic of a new day. He'd replaced his water-damaged resume and bought a new folder at an office supply store, using money he really couldn't spare. But he'd also pressed his suit again, polished his only pair of dress shoes, and practiced his answers until they felt natural. This time would be different. This time he was ready. Brighton Technologies occupied floors 15 through 20 of a gleaming glass tower in the Loop. The lobby was all marble and chrome, with a reception desk that looked like it belonged on a spaceship. Malik approached the security desk, where a guard checked his ID and printed him a visitor's badge. 15th floor, the guard said without looking up. Elevators are to your right. The elevator was faster than any Malik had ever been in, so fast it made his ears pop. When the doors opened on the 15th floor, he stepped into a different world. The office was open concept, all glass walls and standing desks and employees who looked like they'd stepped out of a catalog. Everyone was young, everyone was busy, and everyone seemed to exude the kind of casual confidence that came from knowing they belonged. Malik suddenly felt very conscious of his discount suit, his older model phone, the slight scuff on his left shoe that he'd tried to cover with black marker. Mr. Johnson, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a professional smile approached. I'm Margaret Stevens, we spoke on email. Welcome to Brighton Technologies. Thank you for the opportunity to reschedule. Of course, right this way. She led him through the maze of workstations to a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Inside, 3 people sat around a glass table, a woman in her 30s taking notes on a tablet, a heavy-set man in his 40s with arms crossed over his chest, and to Malik's surprise, Richard Brooks. Malik's step faltered for just a moment. Richard noticed, and something that might have been amusement flickered across his face. Mr. Johnson, thank you for coming. Richard said, standing to shake his hand. I don't believe we were properly introduced on Friday. I'm Richard Brooks, CEO. This is Jennifer Park, our HR director, and Charles Markson, who manages our data analytics team. Jennifer smiled warmly. Markson barely nodded, his expression somewhere between bored and irritated. Please have a seat, Richard continued, gesturing to the chair opposite them. The interview began normally enough. Jennifer asked about his education, his experience, his interest in the company. Malik answered smoothly, drawing on the research he'd done, and the genuine enthusiasm he felt for their work. But there was tension in the room, palpable and growing. It centered around Markson, whose body language screamed skepticism. Every answer Malik gave was met with a slight frown, a barely audible sigh, or a glance at Richard that clearly said, "Are we really doing this? I see you graduated 3 years ago." Markson said, interrupting one of Malik's responses. "And since then, you've worked a series of temporary positions." He said the word temporary like it tasted bad. "Can you explain the gap in consistent employment?" Malik kept his voice steady. "I've been supporting my family while looking for the right opportunity. I've taken contract work and freelance projects to build my skills and keep current with industry trends. Or you can't hold down a job." The statement hung in the air like a slap. Jennifer's eyes widened. Richard's jaw tightened. "Charles," Jennifer began. "I'm just being direct," Markson said, not taking his eyes off Malik. "We need to know if we're looking at a commitment issue here." Malik felt the familiar weight settling on his shoulders, the burden of proving himself twice as hard, of being assumed guilty of incompetence until proven otherwise. He'd felt it in school, when teachers were surprised by his test scores. He'd felt it in interviews where his qualifications were questioned despite being identical to white candidates who sailed through. He'd felt it his entire life. "I understand your concern," Malik said carefully. "But I'd ask you to look at the quality of my work, rather than the circumstances that forced me to piece together employment while raising my 8-year-old sister alone." "Sister?" Markson leaned back in his chair. "So you have family obligations that might interfere with your work here." "Everyone has personal lives, Mr. Markson. Mine won't interfere with my professional responsibilities." "Easy to say." "Charles, that's enough." Richard's voice was quiet, but firm. "Mr. Johnson's personal circumstances are not on trial here. His qualifications are excellent, and his references speak for themselves." Markson shrugged, but his expression said what he couldn't. "You're only getting this chance because the CEO wants to feel good about himself. Diversity hire." The rest of the interview proceeded with professional courtesy, but the damage was done. Malik could feel the label settling on his shoulders like a heavy coat. Diversity hire. Not hired because he was qualified, not hired because he'd earned it. Hired because the company needed to check a box, to meet a quota, to look progressive. When it ended, Richard walked him to the elevator personally. I apologize for Charles, he's protective of his department, sometimes to a fault. It's fine. It wasn't, but Malik had learned that complaining about these microaggressions just made you look difficult. We'll be in touch by end of day, Richard said, extending his hand. Malik shook it, rode the elevator down, and walked out into the spring sunshine feeling heavier than when he'd arrived. The call came at 4:47 p.m. Malik was helping Ariana with her math homework when his phone rang, Margaret Stevens' name appearing on the screen. Mr. Johnson, we're pleased to offer you the position of Junior Data Analyst, starting Monday, April 1st. The details. The rest of the conversation was a blur. Salary, benefits, start time. Malik said yes to everything, hung up, and stood in the middle of their tiny apartment, feeling like the floor had tilted beneath him. He'd done it, he'd actually done it. You got it. Ariana threw her arms around him, squealing with delight. I got it, he repeated, letting reality sink in. Baby girl, I got it. That night, he opened a journal he'd kept since his father died, a place where he wrote down thoughts he couldn't say out loud. His hand trembled slightly as he wrote April 1st, I start at Brighton Technologies, $52,000 a year. Benefits, a real career, everything I've worked for. But Charles Markson thinks I'm a diversity hire. He didn't say it, but I heard it in every word, saw it in every look. He thinks I'm there because of what I am, not who I am. I'll prove him wrong. If I fail, it'll be because I didn't work hard enough, not because they were right about me, not because of the color of my skin. I have to succeed. For Ariana, for Dad, for everyone who looks like me and gets told they don't belong. I have to succeed. He closed the journal, turned off the light, and tried to sleep. But the weight of what lay ahead kept him awake long into the night, a mixture of hope and determination and fear knotting together in his chest. In 1 week, everything would change. For better or worse, everything would change. Malik's first month at Brighton Technologies was a study in contrasts. On one hand, he was finally doing work that challenged him, that made him feel like the 4 years he'd spent earning his degree hadn't been wasted. He analyzed datasets, built predictive models, and contributed to projects that had real-world impact. On the other hand, he was fighting a war of attrition that nobody acknowledged out loud. Charles Markson was a master of plausible deniability. He never said anything overtly racist. He just gave Malik the assignments no one else wanted, tedious data cleaning tasks that required hours of mind-numbing work but taught him nothing. He forgot to include Malik in important team meetings. He questioned every conclusion Malik drew, demanded extra verification that he didn't require from others, and generally made it clear that Malik would have to work twice as hard to receive half the recognition, and he wasn't alone. Jennifer Chen, another analyst, would barely make eye contact with Malik. Tom Anderson, one of the senior developers, had made a comment about lowering the bar loud enough for Malik to overhear. The microaggressions piled up like paper cuts, individually small, collectively devastating. But there was Lydia Martinez. Lydia was a senior data scientist, 32 years old, with a reputation for brilliance and a complete disregard for corporate politics. She was the one who'd stopped by Malik's desk on his third day, dropped a USB drive next to his keyboard, and said, "You look lost. This has training modules I put together for new hires. Official onboarding is garbage." "Thanks," Malik had said, surprised. "Don't mention it." Literally, Markson hates when people help each other without his permission. He likes keeping people dependent on him. That was the beginning of their friendship. Lydia taught him the unwritten rules of the office, warned him about which projects were career suicide, and more importantly, treated him like a colleague instead of a checkbox on a diversity scorecard. "You're good at this," she told him one afternoon, as they reviewed his analysis of customer churn patterns. "Really good. Don't let Markson's insecurity make you doubt that. Is it that obvious? That he's threatened by you? To anyone with eyes, yeah." She lowered her voice. "He's been here 8 years and thinks he owns the analytics department. Richard bringing you in personally, that scared him. And scared men do stupid things." Malik didn't fully understand what she meant until the Detroit project. It started innocuously enough. Brighton Technologies had landed a major contract with an automotive manufacturer, a deal worth millions. The analytics team would be providing real-time supply chain optimization. It was the kind of project that could make careers. Markson assigned Malik to data validation, essentially checking other people's work for errors. It was important but invisible, the kind of role that ensured he'd get none of the credit if things went well, but all of the blame if they went wrong. Malik didn't complain, he just did the work, meticulously checking every data point, every algorithm, every assumption, and that's when he found it. There was a discrepancy in the inventory forecasting model, a small one, barely noticeable, but enough to throw off predictions by nearly 5%. Over the scope of a multi-million-dollar contract, that could mean disastrous shortages or expensive overstock. He flagged it immediately, sending a detailed report to Markson with suggestions for correction. Markson's response came 3 hours later. This is within acceptable margins. Proceed with current model, but it wasn't within acceptable margins. Malik knew it. He double-checked his work, ran the numbers again, and confirmed the error. He sent another email, this one more urgent. Charles, I really think we need to address this. The confidence interval is too wide, and if the model fails, I said proceed, came the reply. Unless you're questioning my judgment. Malik stared at his screen, a decision crystallizing in his mind. He could drop it, follow orders, and if things went south, claim he was just following protocol, or he could escalate over Markson's head, which would make an enemy out of his direct supervisor. He thought about his father, working in that warehouse, never speaking up, never rocking the boat, dying from the stress of swallowing his own voice. Malik opened a new email, addressed to Jennifer Park in HR with Richard Brooks CC'd. I'm writing to formally document a concern regarding the Detroit contract. He hit send before he could second-guess himself. The meeting was scheduled for Friday morning, 2 days later. Malik, Markson, Jennifer, Richard, and 2 other senior managers crammed into a conference room that suddenly felt very small. Markson spoke first, his voice dripping with condescension. I've reviewed Mr. Johnson's concerns, and while I appreciate his diligence, this is a case of inexperience, misinterpreting normal variance in predictive modeling. Can you walk us through your analysis, Malik? Richard asked. Malik did. He pulled up his laptop, connected to the screen, and walked them through every calculation, every data point, every reason why the current model would fail. He spoke clearly, confidently, knowing that if he showed even a moment of doubt, Markson would pounce. When he finished, the room was silent. Jennifer broke it. This seems like a legitimate concern. It's overthinking. Markson countered. The model has been stress-tested. By who? Lydia's voice came from the doorway. She'd been pulled into the meeting at the last minute, because I just ran the same analysis Malik did, and he's right. The model's going to underperform by at least 4%, probably more. Markson's face reddened. With all due respect, Lydia, you weren't on this project, neither was Malik, technically. You had him doing grunt work. But he found a critical flaw that the rest of the team missed. She looked at Richard. If we deploy this model as is, we're going to breach contract within 3 months. The silence that followed was deafening. Richard stood, his expression unreadable. Charles, I want the model revised using Malik's recommendations. We delay implementation by 1 week if necessary, but we do it right. Richard, this is going to make us look incompetent. No, deploying a flawed model would make us look incompetent. Catching it before it causes damage makes us look thorough. Meeting adjourned. Everyone filed out. Malik remained seated, his laptop still open, adrenaline making his hands shake slightly. Richard paused at the door. Good work, Malik. Thank you, sir. When he was alone, Malik closed his eyes and released a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. He'd done it. He'd stood up, spoken truth, and somehow miraculously been heard. But as he packed up his laptop, he caught Markson watching him through the glass wall. The look on his supervisor's face was pure venom. Malik had won the battle, but the war, he suspected, was just beginning. The next 2 weeks were tense. Markson was professionally cordial, but refused to make eye contact with Malik. Assignments came through email rather than face-to-face conversations. Malik's access to certain shared drives was mysteriously revoked and then reinstated with no explanation. It was death by 1,000 bureaucratic cuts, but the Detroit project was successful. The revised model performed beautifully. Predictions came within a margin of error, so small it impressed even the client's data team, and Brighton Technologies received commendations for their thoroughness. Malik's name wasn't mentioned in any of the congratulatory emails. Then came the audit. It started with an email from IT security, requesting that Malik come to the 7th floor immediately. No explanation, just the demand for his immediate presence. He walked into a small office to find 2 men in suits, internal security, and Jennifer Park looking deeply uncomfortable. "Mr. Johnson, please have a seat," one of the security officers said. "We've received allegations of data misappropriation." Malik's blood ran cold. What? On March 20th, approximately 2.3 gigabytes of proprietary client data was accessed and copied to an external drive. "The access logs show your credentials were used." "That's impossible." "I didn't." "The logs don't lie," the second officer said. "We need you to surrender your laptop and phone for examination." "This doesn't make sense." "I wouldn't. Why would I risk everything for?" "We're not making accusations," Jennifer interjected quickly. "We're just investigating. But until this is resolved, you're being placed on administrative leave." Administrative leave. The words felt like a punch to the gut. "I didn't do this." "Then the investigation will clear you." The first officer extended his hand. "Your laptop and phone, please." Malik handed them over with trembling hands. "How long will this take?" "Could be a few days, could be a few weeks." They escorted him out of the building. In the elevator, surrounded by security he'd never thought he'd need to be protected from, Malik felt the walls closing in. Everything he'd worked for, the job, the stability, the future he'd promised Ariana, crumbling like sand through his fingers. He called Lydia from the lobby on a borrowed phone. "They're saying I stole data," he told her, his voice raw. "March 20th. But I didn't, Lydia. I swear to God, I didn't." March 20th. He heard typing in the background. "That's Malik, that's the day you were in that all-day training seminar. The one on emerging AI applications." "I know. I was there from 9 to 5. Can you prove it?" "I signed in. There were 40 people there." More typing. Then a long pause. "Malik, the access logs show the data was copied at 2:47 p.m. You were in a room with 40 witnesses at that exact time. So someone used my credentials. Someone who knew you'd have an alibi." The implication hit him like a freight train. This wasn't random. This was planned. This was a trap. Malik spent the next 3 days in a haze of anxiety. He couldn't work, couldn't sleep. He filed for unemployment benefits, knowing they'd take weeks to come through. He called the temp agency about warehouse shifts, swallowing his pride because rent didn't pay itself. Ariana knew something was wrong. She didn't ask questions, just hugged him tighter before bed, and told him she loved him. On the 4th day at 2 a.m., Malik gave up on sleep and opened his laptop, his personal one, not the one security had confiscated. He started going through everything he could remember about March 20th. The training had been mandatory for all analytics staff. He'd sat in the back, next to Lydia. They'd joked about the facilitator's monotone voice. Who else had been there? He tried to reconstruct the room in his mind. Jennifer, Tom Anderson, 3 junior analysts, and Markson had been there too, sitting up front, ostentatiously taking notes. Wait, Markson. Malik sat up straighter. If Markson had been at the training, he couldn't have used Malik's credentials either, unless, his mind started racing. He opened a browser and searched for IP spoofing and remote access. Within an hour he'd taught himself the basics of network security, enough to understand that with the right tools, someone could access the network remotely and make it look like the access came from a different location. But proving it, that would require access to system logs he no longer had. At 6 a.m., his phone rang. It was Richard Brooks. "Malik, I've been trying to reach you. I just learned about the investigation." "Mr. Brooks, I didn't do what they're saying." "I know. Jennifer just sent me the training attendance records." You couldn't have copied that data because you were in a room with 40 witnesses, including myself. Malik's breath caught. You were there. I sat in for the last hour. I remember seeing you. Richard's voice hardened. Someone is trying to frame you, and I intend to find out who. I have a theory, Malik said slowly, but I'd need access to the network logs. The real ones, not just the access records. Come to my office, 7 a.m. Bring whatever you need. At 7:15 a.m., Malik sat in Richard's office, a space he'd never been in before, all glass and chrome and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Richard had pulled strings, got IT to grant Malik temporary access to the full network audit logs. You have 2 hours before the security team comes in, Richard said. After that this becomes official, and lawyers get involved. If you're going to find something, find it now. Malik's fingers flew over the keyboard. He traced the data access, following the digital breadcrumbs. Someone had been clever. They'd routed the connection through 3 different proxy servers, but they'd made one mistake: the timing. The data copy had taken 17 minutes. During those 17 minutes, there had been a brief network hiccup, a tiny pause where the connection had been re-established, and in that pause, for just a fraction of a second, the real IP address had been exposed. Malik cross-referenced it with the Employee Network Access Database. Charles Markson's home IP address. Got you, Malik whispered. He printed the evidence, highlighted the relevant sections, and handed the stack of papers to Richard. He did it from home. Probably used stolen admin credentials to access my account remotely. He was betting that by the time anyone looked closely, the logs would be overwritten. Richard read through the pages, his expression growing darker with each one. Why would he risk his career for this? Because I threatened his position. Because he couldn't accept that I was good at my job. Because Malik stopped choosing his words carefully. Because some people would rather destroy someone than admit they were wrong about them. Richard was quiet for a long moment, then he picked up his phone. Security, I need you in my office, now, and bring Charles Markson with you. Markson's face when he walked into that office, the shock, the fear, the gradual realization that he'd been caught, was something Malik would remember for the rest of his life. The interrogation was brief. Faced with incontrovertible evidence, Markson tried to bluster, then to minimize, and finally collapsed into bitter accusations. You don't belong here, he spat at Malik. You got this job because Brooks felt guilty, not because you earned it. Everything about this is affirmative action bullshit. That's enough. Richard's voice cut through the room like a blade. Malik Johnson is one of the most talented analysts I've ever worked with. He found a critical flaw in the Detroit project that you missed. He just uncovered a sophisticated data breach that our entire security team overlooked. And he did all of this while you were actively trying to sabotage him. I was protecting this company from what? From competence, from talent, from someone who made you look bad by being better at your job than you are. Richard stood, his full CEO authority on display. You're fired, effective immediately. Security will escort you out. And if I hear that you've said one word of defamation about Mr. Johnson to any potential employer, our legal team will make your life very uncomfortable. Do I make myself clear? Markson didn't answer. Security led him out, his face ashen. When they were alone, Richard turned to Malik. I'm sorry we didn't see this sooner. I'm sorry you had to go through this. It's not your fault, it is. I'm the CEO. The culture of this company is my responsibility. He sat down, suddenly looking tired. Malik, I want to offer you Charles' position. Team lead for data analytics, substantial raise. And I want your input on reforming our hiring and promotion practices, because clearly we've failed. Malik stared at him, certain he'd misheard. You want to make me team lead? You've earned it, multiple times over. What do you say? What did he say? Malik thought about his father, dying without ever getting the recognition he deserved. He thought about Ariana, believing in him even when he struggled to believe in himself. He thought about Eleanor Brooks on that curb, and the choice he'd made to help her despite the cost. Maybe the universe did pay attention to kindness. Maybe it took its time, tested you, made you prove you meant it. But maybe in the end it paid attention. I say yes, Malik answered, and thank you for believing in me, for fighting for me. You fought for yourself, Richard corrected. I just made sure you had a fair arena. As Malik left the office that morning, his permanent access badge in hand, and a new title on his contract, he felt something shift inside him. The weight he'd been carrying, the constant need to prove himself, to justify his existence, didn't disappear. It probably never would, but it felt lighter somehow, manageable. He pulled out his phone and texted Ariana, "We need to celebrate tonight. Your brother just became a boss." Her response came immediately, "I'm proud of you. Dad would be too." Malik smiled through the tears that suddenly blurred his vision. "Yeah," he typed back. "I think he would be." The all-staff meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. on a Friday 3 weeks after Markson's termination. These meetings were rare, usually reserved for major announcements or company milestones. The main conference hall on the 20th floor was packed with over 200 employees, all wondering what was important enough to pull them away from their work. Malik sat in the third row with Lydia, his palms sweating despite the room's aggressive air conditioning. He knew what was coming. Richard had briefed him yesterday, but that didn't make it less terrifying. Richard took the stage, his presence commanding immediate silence. "Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. I know you're all busy, so I'll be direct. Today I want to talk about the values that define Brighton Technologies, and how sometimes we fail to live up to them." A murmur rippled through the crowd. This wasn't the usual corporate pep talk. A few months ago, this company almost made a catastrophic mistake. We nearly deployed a flawed analytical model to a major client, a mistake that would have cost us millions in lost revenue, and more importantly, our reputation for excellence. We didn't make that mistake because one of our analysts, on his first major project, had the courage to speak up when he saw a problem. Even when his direct supervisor dismissed his concerns. Even when it would have been easier to stay silent. Richard paused, letting that sink in. That analyst is Malik Johnson. Every head in the room turned to look at Malik. He felt his face grow hot but kept his eyes forward. "But that's not all," Richard continued. "A few weeks ago we discovered a serious security breach, someone attempting to frame Mr. Johnson for data theft. It was a sophisticated attack that our entire security team initially missed. Malik, working with limited resources and under enormous pressure, traced the breach back to its source and provided evidence that led to the termination of a senior employee." More murmurs. Everyone knew someone had been fired, but the details had been kept quiet. "I'm telling you this because I want you to understand something fundamental about this company. We don't succeed because we're perfect. We succeed because we have people who refuse to let imperfection slide. We succeed because we have employees who care more about doing the right thing than about politics or comfort or keeping their heads down." Richard's eyes found Malik in the crowd. "Stand up, please." Malik stood, his legs unsteady. "This is Malik Johnson, our new director of data analytics. He's 25 years old. He's been with us for less than 3 months, and he's already saved this company from 2 major disasters. I want you to look at him, remember his name, and understand that excellence doesn't have an age requirement. It doesn't have a tenure requirement. It just requires courage, intelligence, and integrity." The applause started with Lydia, then rippled outward. Within seconds the entire room was standing, clapping. Malik felt tears pricking his eyes and blinked them back furiously. "There's one more thing," Richard said when the applause died down. "As director, Malik will be overseeing a new initiative we're launching, the Brighton Scholars Program. We're partnering with 3 Chicago public universities to provide full-ride scholarships for students pursuing STEM degrees. Students from underfunded schools, students who have the talent but not the resources, because talent doesn't care about your zip code or your bank account, and neither should we." Now Malik did let the tears fall. He'd proposed the program 2 weeks ago, expecting it to be dismissed as too expensive or too complicated. Instead, Richard had greenlit it immediately. "The program will award its first scholarships this fall," Richard concluded. "And I can't think of a better person to run it than someone who understands firsthand what these students are up against. Thank you all for being here. Now get back to changing the world." As people filed out, dozens stopped to congratulate Malik. Some he recognized, many he didn't, but their words were genuine, their pride in working for a company that actually tried to live its values evident. Malik was making his way toward the door when he heard a familiar small voice. "Malik." He turned to find Ariana running toward him, her backpack bouncing. Behind her, smiling broadly, was Eleanor Brooks, walking with a cane but steady on her feet. Baby girl, what are you doing here? Mrs. Brooks picked me up from school. Ariana threw her arms around him. She said today was important and I should be here. Malik looked at Eleanor in confusion. How did you? Richard is my son, dear. Did you really not make that connection? She laughed at his expression. When he told me what had been happening to you at work, I insisted on being here today, and I insisted that Ariana be here too. Because this, she gestured around them. This is what it looks like when good people are finally recognized for being good. You healed, Malik said, noticing how much stronger she looked compared to their last meeting. I had good doctors, and a very good reason to get better. I wanted to thank you properly. She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. This is for Ariana's college fund. No arguments, she added when Malik started to protest. You gave me your time when you had none to spare. The least I can do is invest in her future. Malik opened the envelope. Inside was a check that made his breath catch. $50,000. Mrs. Brooks, I can't accept this. You can, and you will. Consider it a grandmother's prerogative to spoil a bright young girl who deserves every opportunity in the world. Ariana hugged Eleanor. Thank you for bringing me today, and for helping Malik. Oh sweetheart, your brother is the one who helps people. I'm just trying to keep up. Richard appeared, having navigated through the congratulating crowd. I see Mom found you. I hope she didn't embarrass you too much. She gave Ariana $50,000 for college. Sounds about right. She does that. Richard smiled. Listen, I wanted to talk to you about the Scholars Program. I'm doubling the initial budget. Instead of 20 scholarships, we're doing 50. 50? Malik's voice cracked. That's incredible. It's necessary. And it's just the beginning. Richard's expression grew serious. Malik, what happened to you here? The prejudice, the sabotage, that can't happen again. Not to anyone. I'm counting on you to help me make sure it doesn't. I won't let you down. I know you won't. You haven't yet. That evening Malik took Ariana out for pizza, a real restaurant, not the dollar slice place, and let her order whatever she wanted. They sat in a booth by the window, watching the Chicago sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Today was a good day, Ariana said, tomato sauce on her chin. Yeah, baby girl. It really was. Do you think Daddy would be proud? Malik looked at his sister, this brave, brilliant 8-year-old who'd never complained about the ratty apartment, or the ramen dinners, or the times he couldn't afford to buy her the shoes she needed. Yeah, I think he'd be very proud of both of us. Because we didn't give up. Because we didn't let the world make us mean. That's the hardest thing, staying kind when people give you every reason not to be. Ariana nodded wisely. Mrs. Brooks said, you're a hero. I'm not a hero, I just tried to do the right thing. That's what heroes do, Malik. He smiled, reaching across the table to wipe the sauce from her face. Then I guess we're both heroes. You for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself. Always, she said firmly. I'll always believe in you. They finished their pizza and walked home through the spring evening, the city alive around them. And for the first time in as long as Malik could remember, he felt like he belonged in it. Like his presence mattered. Like the future was something to look forward to, rather than fear. It was a feeling he intended to hold on to. 14 months later, on a warm April morning, Malik stood at a bus stop on the south side of Chicago. But this time, he wasn't waiting to ride. He was there for the dedication. The bronze plaque mounted on the newly renovated shelter read, Marcus Johnson Memorial Stop. In honor of those who help others rise. It's perfect, Ariana said, standing beside him in her new school uniform. She was taller now, growing faster than Malik could keep up with. Daddy would love it. Yeah, he would. The Bus Stop Decision Foundation, the non-profit Malik had founded 6 months ago with Eleanor Brooks as co-chair, had renovated 15 bus shelters in underserved neighborhoods. Each one was named after someone who'd made a difference through simple acts of kindness. His father's was the first. A small crowd had gathered for the dedication. Richard and Eleanor Brooks, Lydia and several colleagues from Brighton Technologies, and 37 students who'd received scholarships through the Brighton Scholars Program. The first cohort, the beginning of something bigger. Richard stepped forward to speak. 1 year ago, Malik Johnson was just trying to get to a job interview. He could have ignored an elderly woman in pain. He could have prioritized his own future over a stranger's immediate need. but he didn't. And that choice, that single decision to be kind when kindness was inconvenient, changed not just his life, but dozens of lives. The scholarships these students received exist because Malik insisted that opportunity shouldn't be limited to those who can afford it. These bus shelters exist because Malik remembered what it felt like to be invisible in the very city he called home. Malik felt his face grow warm as Richard continued. But more than any program or initiative, Malik gave us something more valuable. He reminded us what it means to build a society where we actually see each other, where we stop for people who need help, even when we're running late, where kindness isn't a weakness but a strength. After Richard finished, Eleanor took the microphone. She was 80 now, but her voice was strong. I've taught thousands of children in my life. I've seen great potential realized and great potential wasted, but I've never seen someone quite like Malik. He saved my life that day on the bus, but more than that, he saved my faith in humanity. And now through his work he's helping hundreds of young people save themselves from poverty, from limited options, from a society that too often tells them they don't matter. She looked directly at Malik. You matter. Every single one of you matters. And this bus stop is a reminder that small acts of kindness create ripples we can't always predict, but we can always trust to spread. One of the scholarship recipients, a young woman named Jessica Torres, was next. A year ago, I was working 2 jobs and taking classes at community college, trying to figure out how I'd ever afford to finish my degree. The Brighton Scholars Program didn't just give me money, it gave me time. Time to study, time to sleep, time to actually be a student instead of just surviving. And now I'm studying computer science at Northwestern, getting A's, and planning to come back to my neighborhood to teach kids who look like me that they can do this too. The applause was thunderous. Malik was the last to speak. He stood in front of the memorial shelter, looking at his father's name, and felt the weight of everything that had brought him to this moment. My father used to tell me that the world wasn't built for people like us, he began. That we'd have to fight twice as hard for half as much. And he was right about the fighting, but he was wrong about one thing. We're not fighting against the world, we're fighting for it. Fighting to make it better. Fighting to prove that kindness isn't weakness, that helping others doesn't make you a sucker, and that the measure of a society isn't how well it treats its most powerful members, but how well it treats its most vulnerable ones. He paused, gathering his thoughts. A year and a half ago, I got on a bus for a job interview I'd spent months preparing for. I had it all planned out. I was going to walk in there, impress them, and change my life. And then an old woman fell, and the driver left her on the side of the road, and I had to make a choice. He looked at Eleanor, who was wiping her eyes. I didn't know that helping her would lead to getting the job anyway. I didn't know that her son would end up being the CEO. I didn't do it for a reward. I did it because it was the right thing to do. Because my father raised me to be someone who stops when people need help. His voice grew stronger, and that's what this foundation is about. We're not waiting for the world to be kind first. We're being the start. Every renovated bus stop, every scholarship, every program we create, it's all saying the same thing. We see you, you matter, and we're not going to walk past you when you need help. He turned to the students. Some of you will become doctors, some will become teachers or engineers or artists, some of you will change the world in ways we can't even imagine yet. But all of you, all of us, have the power to change one person's day, to stop when someone falls, to offer a hand when everyone else keeps walking. That's the real revolution, not the grand gestures, but the small acts of kindness repeated so many times that they become our culture instead of our exception. The applause came again, but Malik barely heard it. He was looking at Ariana, at Eleanor, at Richard, at Jessica, and all the other students whose lives had intersected with his in this impossible, beautiful chain of events that started with a bus ride and a choice. After the ceremony, people lingered. Malik watched as an elderly man struggled with his shopping bags while waiting for the bus. Without hesitation, one of the scholarship recipients, a young man named David, rushed over to help. Lydia appeared at Malik's elbow. I think it's working. What? Your revolution? Look. She nodded toward David helping the elderly man. He learned that from you. No, he already knew it. He just needed to see that it matters. A bus pulled up. Not the same bus from that morning, 18 months ago, but it might as well have been. People got on and off, living their lives, rushing to appointments and jobs and obligations. Most of them didn't notice the bronze plaque or the small crowd gathered around it, but some did. A few stopped to read the inscription. A teenager took a picture. A mother pointed it out to her young son. Seeds, Malik thought. We're planting seeds. Ariana tugged on his sleeve. Can we go home now? I want to work on my science project. Yeah, baby girl, let's go home. As they walked away from the bus stop, Ariana chattering about photosynthesis experiments, Malik took one last look back. The morning sun reflected off the bronze plaque, making his father's name shine. Marcus Johnson Memorial Stop. In honor of those who help others rise, the bus pulled away carrying its passengers to wherever they needed to go. And in its wake, standing at the shelter his son had built in his memory, Marcus Johnson's name remained, a quiet reminder that ordinary people doing ordinary kindnesses could change the world, one bus stop at a time, one choice at a time, one act of seeing another human being and deciding they matter. That was the revolution. That was the dream, and it was just beginning.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.